my beloved, let us go forth into the fields and lodge in the villages. Let us go out early to the vineyards and see whether the vines have budded, whether the grape blossoms have opened, and the pomegranates are in bloom. There I will give you my love. The mandrakes give forth fragrance, and over our doors are all choice of fruits, new as well as old, which I have laid up for you, O my beloved. And from Proverbs chapter 5. Let them be for yourself alone, and not for sharing with strangers. Let your fountain be blessed, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. May her breast satisfy you at all times. May you be intoxicated always by her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, by another woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For human ways are under the eyes of the Lord, and he examines all their paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare them, and they are caught in the toils of their sin. They die for lack of discipline, and because of their great folly, they are lost. And from Matthew chapter 5, we read a passage concerning adultery. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. And concerning the works of the flesh, from Galatians chapter 5. Live by the Spirit, I say, and do not gratify the desires of the flesh. For what the flesh desires is opposed to the Spirit, and what the Spirit desires is opposed to the flesh. For these are opposed to each other, to prevent you from doing what you want. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not subject to the law. Now the works of the flesh are obvious: fornication, impurity, licentiousness, idolatry, sorcery, enmities, strife, jealousy, anger, quarrels, dissensions, factions, envy, drunkenness, carousing, and things like these. I am warning you, as I warned you before, those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. And finally, from Revelation chapter 21. But as for the cowardly, the faithless, the polluted, the murderers, the fornicators, the sorcerers, the idolaters, and all liars, their place will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. This is the word of God.
Thanks be to God. For those of you who've never heard me preach, you know that I like to select very interesting Bible passages to go along with my sermons. And I hope I didn't disappoint this time. Lots of plucking out of members and burning in hell and second death in a lake of fire. So we're going to talk about all that. It's going to be really interesting. For the first time in my life, I have to say I'm actually nervous about preaching, and there's an interesting story behind this. So, but before I start, so in case you didn't know, I'm preaching about sex today. So I have a few caveats before we get started. So if there are those of you, we don't have any kids in here, do we? Okay. Well, hey, if your kids are in here and they want to listen, that's fine. But just know that I am not holding back. We're going to have a conversation, a real conversation about sex. The second caveat is that I probably will offend someone in some way. There's not much I can do about that. I can't talk about sex and sexuality without giving it full respect. I will not talk about tigers and leave out the teeth and things. If you do get offended, please come talk to me to my face and say what it is that offended you, and we can talk about it and why it was perhaps offensive. Any suggestions you might have on improving it next time, things like that. The fourth caveat is that I was instructed by multiple people not to include my own interpretive dance. It's certainly welcome from Jenny, but not from me. I'm not allowed to use puppets, pictures, videos, sound, or PowerPoint. These are all requests from multiple people. So that just leaves me no other medium other than just talking to you about this stuff. So for those of you who are here for puppetry, I'm sorry. The fifth thing is, the reason I said that I'm nervous is I have my own hang-up. So there's a big cultural difference between the South and the Northwest. But my statement is simply that I have hang-ups about this subject. We all do, I think. But those are my problems, and I'll just have to get over it. But, it's what makes us unique. Instead of getting offended or embarrassed, consider why it is that you get offended by what offends you, rather than just, oh, well, I can't stand that preacher. He always just shoots off at the mouth and blah, blah, blah. Well, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, which is the Bible Belt. For me, it is, at least. It may not be for you. I don't know. But one of the things that is interesting about this is that I call it the sex versus money conversation. So in the South, I know for a fact I've offended people in the past giving talks and sermons about money. And where I'm from, that's not an unusual conversation. We talk about money. My pastor from my home church preaches on tithing 4 times a year. We're not afraid to ask people how much they pay for their house. That's just how it is in the South. Up here, not so much. But what's interesting is, though, in the South, they do not want to talk about sex at all. And that's actually one of the subjects of this conversation. That there's a distinct lack of conversation, and it comes up over and over again when I was talking with friends about the sermon. But if here in the Northwest, let's just talk about sex all the time. Let's just make sex jokes at the office, and condoms for everyone. And it just freaks me out sometimes. I'm not gonna lie. But like I said, I have hang-ups. That's mine to get over. So I guess I want you to understand that for me, there's a cultural difference. So when I talk to you about these things, it's not that it makes me a little uncomfortable. I guess I'm just afraid someone's going to stand up and yell, "You're I don't know." One of the things that, for those of you who've either spent time or grown up in the South, you can probably attest to this. There is a distinct lack of conversation about sex, just period, point blank. The primary form of birth control that is taught in the South, in churches and in schools, is abstinence only. So in other words, when I say that, that means just don't have sex until you get married. And when you're in biology, they give you the PowerPoint presentation of what a penis and a vagina is, but that's literally it. They don't want to talk about like ethics or birth control. There's none of that stuff. And what's really interesting, I was doing a lot of readings for this. Please don't search my browsing history. It does not look good right now. But so I don't know if you know this or not. So I'm gonna hit you with some statistics. So how many of you think single people? Show of hands. How many of you think single people have more sex than anyone? All right. How many of you think married people have more sex than anyone? You people are right. Married people have way more sex than single people. Now, here's the real question, though. What age group do you think has the most sex? So, do you think it's the 20 and 30-year-olds? They show of hands. Anybody think they have the most sex? No. Okay, that's a good guess. What about the 40s and 50s? Anybody in there? What about my retirees, 60s, early 70s? Okay. Actually, the people who have the most sex are people in their 70s and 80s and 90s. I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. I know you guys think I'm lying. Now, where's Donna? Donna Estlin. I know I always drag you into my sermons. I'm sorry. Her granddaughter is a doctor. Is that right?
It's her daughter. No.
Oh, it's her daughter?
And she works in a medical office.
Okay, medical office, and said that she could retire just treating STDs in nursing homes and retirement communities. So here's the conversation that's being missed here, is that, so people in retirement communities, nursing homes and things like that, they're getting around. Whether you want to think about it or not. But, so here's the issue, is that none of them are using birth control because, well, you can't get birth, right? Okay, well, that's great. That's like half the reason you use birth control. The other half is what these things we call STDs or STIs, and they actually have this really high rate of them in nursing homes. I have, she's over there shaking her head. She's a nurse. She knows. Nurse practitioner, excuse me. I'm terribly sorry. Distinct difference. But the point still remains the same, right? That, so we have all these expectations about, oh, well, you know, single people are out there just mixing it up and doing these things. And, are you kidding me? No, it's people who've like retired and they're married and yeah, they're putting us all to shame. And the reason I bring that up is because this talk of birth control, and you know, we say birth control, but it encompasses everything. It encompasses education. It encompasses proper condom use. There's all kinds of things like that. And these are not the conversations that are being had nationwide. And it might be true here in the Northwest. I don't know. I haven't really had much interaction with sex ed in the Northwest. I'm sure it's interesting. But in the South, where I'm from, like I said, abstinence only is the main technique. And because of that, we have double the birth rate of the rest of the nation. Dead serious. Now, this is also an interesting fact to me, too. Again, don't search my computer. Pornography use is doubled in Bible Belt states lead the U.S. in gay pornography searches between 2004 and 2011. So the place where you're getting the most hate about gay people are doing double the searches of the rest of the country. Isn't that crazy? So if I had to sum up what it's like being a Christian in the South and having to deal with sex, it's this really great quote by Butch Hancock. He's a folk singer. It says, "Life in Lubbock, Texas taught me two things. One is that God loves you and you're going to burn in hell. The other is that sex is the most awful, dirty thing on the face of the earth and you should save it for someone you love." And, you know, honestly, I wish I could say that was funny, but that's pretty much all of my 30 years in the South. So we have this church, this huge mega church in my hometown, Southern Baptist. We call it Six Flags Over Jesus. And, wish I was making that up, too. The pastor his name is Bill Purvis. He's actually a really nice guy. But he gives some, you know, it's the South, it's patriarchal. He gives some real interesting love advice. But this is from a friend of mine who goes to that church. And the pastor says, the number one way to prevent adultery in marriage is to have sex with your spouse every morning because it satisfies a woman's need for intimacy and a man's need for the physical and vice versa. Yeah, I know. It's an interesting take on it. And I know that the dude up in Marsville, what's his name? I can't remember. But he would always talk about the same thing. It's like, you know, make sure you just have infinity amounts of sex. It'll keep you from straying. And it's like, not really. It's a little more complex than that. This is a quote from a good friend of mine he's Southern Baptist. He's been Southern Baptist his whole life and went to Baptist school and Baptist college. So he's kind of Baptist. Religion preaches abstinence as the only method and expects perfection from imperfect people. There's a lot of pressure to remain chaste. Sex results in pregnancy, disease, or your penis falling off. That's what they're taught. It's not taught as an enjoyable way of life. And he says, But his response to it is he said, I don't think that one should get around, but kids need to be educated, and religion, especially in the South, hinders that. We're just flat out unequipped. And I pick on the South because that's what I know, but it's that way in the Midwest. There are other parts of the country. It may not be as repressive. I'm sure the Northwest has its hang-ups. Again, feel free to educate me. But, my mom was telling me she went to a Baptist college, and they, one of the things that it was a girls' college, and that one of the things they were required to take was a class called Psychology of Sex. And in that class, they studied people like Masters and Johnson. The HBO, Showtime has a show on it called Masters of Sex. Watch it at your own risk. But there's Kinsey, Alfred Kinsey. It's the Kinsey study. He's an interesting guy. Margaret Mead, who did sex and anthropology. These are people that, for my mom, she said that it really helped inform us because these were girls at a Southern Baptist college in the 1960s. You can imagine the kind of stuff that comes with that. Our solution in this country is to emphasize what I saw perfectly called the virginity code. And it's this idea basically that you should wait until you're married to have sex, and you should be a virgin as long as you can. I'm not saying I disagree, but I think the rules have kind of changed since 36 AD. One of those things is life expectancy, and another one of those is marriage rates. So if you look at the average person getting married, back in that time, in Jesus' time, they got married when they were like 14. So waiting until you were married was not a long wait. But if you have someone who waits until they're 35, that can get kind of interesting, right? Yeah, I don't know. But then there's also this idea that you're supposed to be married with one person together for the rest of your life. And that does work for some people. I'm not knocking it one bit. I brought that up in class, and I'm bringing up Donna again. She said, we were married for 50 years, and we're still happy. She's still happy. And that's awesome. It's not the majority. That's the problem. And especially in the really evangelical Christian circles, what I often saw was people who were hurried to get married so they could have sex. I mean, really. And then after they got married and they had a wedding and they had sex, then they had the marriage. And that's not a bad thing, but it's not an easy thing. Especially if you're married to someone that you may or may not should have married. I don't know, it depends. I can't really make that call. The other thing is the fact that the vows that were written until death do you part were written when life expectancy was like 40. And so now to have them to hold forevermore is like 60 years. Because they say the average lifespan is up to like 87 now or something like that. I mean, it's a long time. And I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying it's a little bit different than when these laws were put into place. And that's something to consider. But then there's also this conversation where we talk about everything's dirty, like sex is dirty, and we talk about as Christians we talk about how the body is dirty, but the soul is just so pure. And it's like, come on, have you ever known somebody with an impure soul? It totally gets dirty, just like the body does. I mean, the body is dirty. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it's like disgusting. I mean, at any given point right now, 2 pounds of your body weight is straight up bacteria. If you want to know where a lot of the bacteria lives, it lives in your stomach. It's unique. There's actually stuff in your stomach that's never been seen before. It's unique to you. It's unique to everyone. There's actually quite a fair amount of bacteria on your eyelashes too, which is why they tell you not to rub your eyes so much. Am I freaking you out yet? Good. But see, here's the question then, because it becomes like, well, is that really dirty? I mean, is bacteria inherently dirty? Because doctors and scientists will say, especially the flora and fauna that live in your gut, that all the activia that you see, that's what it's replacing. That stuff's actually good. It's good bacteria. So just because it's bacteria doesn't mean it's bad or dirty or whatever. The body can be clean. And that's really what this sermon series is about. It's about honoring the body. There's this old medieval idea that we're supposed to just, not worry about our bodies because we're going to die and we're all going to go to heaven. It's going to be great anyways. And it's like, yeah, okay, that's awesome. But what do you do if you treat your body like crap and you suffer for the next 50 years? It's not a really good body retirement plan, you know what I mean? So it's one of those things where we talk about Greek philosophers, and I know everybody in here loves to talk about Greek philosophy. But there have been several movements where, and this is where we get it from. This is where Paul got all of his hang-ups. So Paul was educated. I mean, I know he was a tent maker, but that didn't mean he was stupid. You didn't go to like school, like they didn't have Cornell. Sorry, Jim. But what you did was you got a tutor, and the tutor taught you. His tutor was Gamaliel. Yeah, I say that 5 times fast. So. And he would have taught Paul in Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, and probably Stoicism. You've heard of that. These guys all talked about how the body is imperfect, unclean, but that the soul is pure and clean, and that's what you should focus on. And that's where we get it. Christianity is heavily influenced by philosophy. We get this again with the Gnostics. I don't know if anyone's ever talked to you about Gnosticism before, but Gnosticism is the same idea. But it's also based on the idea that knowledge, which is what Gnosticism, gnoso, it means to know. And this is what they believe. So it was this kind of clean, unclean. And then you got the Shakers. Have you guys ever heard of them? They make great furniture, don't they? Well, actually, they don't make any more furniture because they're all dead. But and you want to know why they're all dead? Because they believed that having sex caused your soul to leave out of your body. And so none of them had sex. So it was divided hall, so they'd have a men's side and a women's side. If you were married, they made you separate and live apart from each other. Well, they all died in 100 years. I mean, what did you expect? You can't have a movement if there's no kids. But more often than not, I think what's important to remember is that in the Bible, when they talk about sex, especially unclean sex, which is what they would have been worried about, they're talking about, the word is called porneia, which is where we get the word pornography. That's where it comes from. But porneia, what it's referring to is cultic prostitution. So in ancient Rome, they used to have cults. And it's kind of like, it's like a really twisted version of the Elks, if I had to describe it. No offense to my Elks in here, but I'm just saying, it's like a social club, but their emphasis is on worshiping a particular god. And in order to raise money for their club, they had prostitutes that would stand out in front. And you would go and you would rent prostitutes, and all the money that they got went to the temple. This was a reality for the Christians in this time. It was not unusual for you to walk down the streets of Rome and see statues with giant penises coming out, and they called them perms. That was very normal. It was not unusual for people to walk around in these festivals with fake penises waving them in your face. And now, the only reason I bring this up is because I want you to realize what they were trying to go against. It was this, Rome was super sexualized. I mean, it was like, we would call it hypersexual. It was everything to them. And for us, for Christians, we just said, it's great, but it's not everything. So I want us to focus on an outlook that's healthy on the body. So how do we do that? How do we honor ourselves? Keeping of course I'm going to say, stay, if you're not married, stay a virgin as long as you can. It even says that for our vows as pastors, we're celibate in singleness and fidelity in marriage. And so there you go. If that's not an option, Keep the lowest amount of partners you can. Practice safe sex. And focus on your biggest sex organ, your brain. One other interesting thing that a lot of people don't talk about in church is pornography. I've been in churches before where the pastor will just briefly mention it, but no one talks exclusively about it. I think it's important to bring up, not because of anything positive related to it, but I can kind of break it down for you over 50 years here. In 1970, a federal study estimated that the total retail value of hardcore pornography in the United States was about $10 million. 1970. In 2001, they put the same study, put the total between $2 and $4 billion. Now, as of 2014, the porn industry was believed to bring in more than $13 billion a year. That is more revenue than Netflix, Google, eBay, Yahoo, Amazon, Microsoft, and Apple combined. And so the question I get occasionally from friends, of course, no one ever asked me in front of church, that's fine, I don't expect you to, is pornography wrong? And there's lots of different viewpoints on it. More often than not, I will say I think it is wrong. And it's not for the reasons that you're thinking. People who are not here or who are not us, they have the right to do what they want. I can't stop anybody from having sex on tape if that's their prerogative. But, my advice for Christians is that porn is bad because it gives you unrealistic expectations. It gives you an unrealistic view of what sex is like. More often than not, it features exaggerated bodies. It doesn't teach any kind of proper safe sex, no proper condom use, nothing like that. It also kind of encourages irresponsible sexual morals. There's plenty of people who argue for it, and that's fine. They have their platform. This is fine. I'd rather people focus on a sexual life with the person they're married to. I think that's more important. I'd rather, and if you're not married, use your imagination. How's that for an answer? One other thing that I find that's really interesting, when I was chatting with Jenny about trying to get, I wanted her to interpret a dance in this service, and we were having a hard time finding our ways. And one of the things I sent her all the passages that I read, and what was one of her comments that I just don't flat think about it because I'm a guy, is that there are really no comments in the Bible about sex written by women. Occasionally there's that voice of the woman in Song of Solomon, but we don't actually know if that's a woman or not. But it's really interesting to think about because it's, we've been looking at this all wrong. It's this idea that we are dictating the rules of sex, but we're not listening to the other half of that sex equation. We're not listening to what women have to say. That's a weird idea, isn't it? Yeah. Especially in the scriptures, and I'm sure you've noticed this as well. There's no focus on the pleasure for the woman. I mean, sex is pleasurable, otherwise people wouldn't do it. But it's not something you think about. You're like, oh yeah, there is nothing mentioned about that. And the reason is that is because they were sexist. I don't know if you know that or not, but the people in this Bible are pretty sexist. And actually what's so interesting is we talk about purity, and it's like, we're going to take a purity pledge, and I'm going to be pure until I'm 85 years old. And here's the thing, when they wrote this was not about men. This was about women, because when they wrote ladies, don't lynch me. I mean, I'm just telling you what they believe. Women were property in the Bible. And so it wasn't about, so if you were a man in ancient Israel, you could have adultery, but it wasn't really adultery. So let me unpack that. So Christ said not to commit adultery, right? Well, so there's this problem. He also talked about not divorcing women, and there was a reason for that. If you're divorced, I'm not going to judge you. This is not what we're talking about. When women got divorced, they had two options for employment: prostitute or beggar. That's it. So that is why Christ said it is literally better for you to have killed her than divorced her. Because if she doesn't have any family, she's now a prostitute. Now here's the interesting thing, because the woman does not belong to anyone, if you're married and you want to go have sex with her, that's not adultery. Not in Jewish law. Ancient Israel law, that is not adultery. So you can go to a prostitute all you want because she doesn't belong to anyone. Now, if you sleep with another man's wife, you have violated his property. You see what I'm saying? This is what I'm talking about. So we take this and we say, oh, well, you know, these purity and this purity laws and all this stuff. It was never about that. In Rome, are you kidding me? The men were not pure. They did orgies. They did all kinds of stuff. You name it, all the stuff that they list in the Bible not to partake in, that was what was going on around them as they walked down the street. And so, you know, we see this like bestiality and incest and, you know, and like sex with a prostitute, and then they murder her in the street in the name of some god. That was normal. That's just weird. I don't know. But, so I think it's one of those things where it's like, if you're going to really talk to me about purity and about being pure versus impure, you need to know where that came from. So I think if you've had enough of this, I can read. I was actually afraid I wasn't going to have enough of material. I forgot how long-winded I can be. Sorry. So in closing, I will read you some of the top quotes about sex from very famous people. This is Swami X. I tried to get people who were religious. Sex is not the answer. Sex is the question. Yes is the answer. It's okay to laugh at this, by the way. I don't know who disappointed you as a child, but it's not me. So, my professor of patristics at Columbia University, sex is like oxygen. You don't worry about it unless you're not getting any. Rumi, the way you make love is the way God will be with you. Homer, not Simpson, the blind poet. The natural thing, my Lord, men and women joined. Osho, I am not saying renounce sex. I'm saying transform it. It need not remain just biological. Bring some spirituality to it. While making love, meditate too. While making love, be prayerful. Love should not be just a physical act. Pour your soul into it. Marcus Aurelius, great Roman emperor. The sexual embrace can only be compared with music and with prayer. And finally, from P.J. O'Rourke, there are a number of mechanical devices which increase sexual arousal, particularly in women. Chief among these is the Mercedes-Benz 380 SL.
Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the fields and lodge in the villages. Let us go out early to the vineyards and see whether